You're listening to the Minnesota Progressive Repartee, here in the liberal land of long beards, lattes, and lutefisk. Since I'm the all-powerful announcer guy and have the power to do this, I'd like to share my thought of the day as we get into today's show. I got nothing. And now here are your hosts, Doug Padgett, Brett Johnson, and Hunter Hawes.
Yeah, and welcome to the Repartee. And today is also our good friend Richard Painter, who, if you've been listening the last couple of Fridays, you've been hearing Richard on Fridays give us some updates on the Mueller report. And since Friday, when you did a pre-record, Richard, the report was submitted to Attorney General Barr and then has created all kinds of conflict for a lot of us who care about this country. Now, you, as a lot of people know about you, you're not only a professor of law, so you think about law. You've worked in a White House or for a White House. When you were the ethics attorney with the Bush White House, did you ever contemplate things that were anywhere close to what's going on now with questions of ethics and law, like there was at the Trump campaign?
Nothing like this. I mean, the last time we had something even remotely resembling this was the Nixon experience in 1973 to 74. We had a special prosecutor then, and Richard Nixon fired the special prosecutor. But Congress stood up to Richard Nixon back then, and we have a different environment right now. So we've got an attorney general who was appointed for the purpose of supervising the Mueller investigation and interpreting the Mueller report. And William Barr is so good at that because he had previously worked with defense lawyers when they were going, after defending everybody against Bob Mueller. He actually interviewed with President Trump, apparently for the possibility of representing him as a lawyer in the Mueller investigation. He drafted memos to the various lawyers working on the defense side about such matters as how the President of the United States cannot obstruct justice because the President is in charge of the executive branch and hires and fires the Attorney General. Memos that may very well have been somewhat similar to that memo we just saw a couple days ago. So we have an Attorney General with enormous conflict of interest. He never should have gone anywhere near the Mueller investigation. I wrote an op-ed in USA Today saying he should recuse. Right. But the United States Senate wanted to give him a pass on that and let him go ahead and become the Attorney General and do what he did. So he gave us a nice 4-page memo that's full of, I'll tell you what it's full of a little later.
Yeah, when we're off air. Well, you've been saying for weeks now that it's really important that we see the details of the Mueller report. We'll talk about that in a bit. But can I just ask you, as a law professional, why is it that the president and the executive branch is in charge of the Justice Department? That's always confused me as someone who likes to herald the idea that we have 3 equal branches of government: an executive branch, a judicial branch, and a lawmaking branch.
Well, the executive is in charge. Yes, that's set forth in the Constitution. I mean, the Attorney General is appointed by the President of the United States.
So is it really 3 equal branches of government? Because it doesn't feel like it.
Well, we don't have a 4th branch. Perhaps we should, which is an independent prosecutor. I don't think the founders contemplated that we would have ethics problems that are as serious as what we've had.
Is that right?
But you could have the courts appoint prosecutors. And indeed, we had a statute called the Independent Counsel Statute after the Nixon era, in which a 3-judge panel would appoint an independent prosecutor. And so you would have judges involved in supervising the prosecutor. That was set forth pursuant to statute after Nixon. But the problem is Ken Starr, he was appointed by a 3-judge panel to investigate an Arkansas land deal called Whitewater, and he ended up investigating, something we really should talk about off air. And a lot of people were thoroughly disgusted with all that. So Congress let the Independent Counsel Statute expire, and now we're back with just the Attorney General appointing the independent counsel.
And when that happened, people talked about it like that was a great advancement, right? People were saying this independent counsel statute's really troublemaking. It's not rooted in enough protections. It gets unruly. All of this. So this and I watch a lot of MSNBC, and the person who helped write those statutes or the rules of this, I see him on there a lot. His name is Cutier.
Yes.
I think he's really proud of this whole thing that was set up with that gave us the approach of Robert Mueller. But it feels like, as somebody who, I have a lot of vested interest in this, it doesn't feel like he was an independent, even though he was an independent prosecutor, that he was able to function independently because he always had to get a sign off from Rod Rosenstein and then from William Barr before he could move forward with any prosecutions.
With indictments, yes. And that's one thing I want to see in the Mueller report, whether they're indictments that he thought should be handed down that he was told he could not by Rod Rosenstein. We do not know that. But
I thought the letter said that there were no declinations.
Apparently, according to the letter, yes. But remember, there's a letter written by an attorney general who has a conflict of interest, who shouldn't have been writing the letter having anything to do with this. So we need to see the Mueller report to see what's going on. But it is a serious problem. We're better off with the independent counsel statute, which allowed the three-judge panel. That was the statute that came in after Nixon, but it had an expiration period. It was on a trial run. It just happened to be that Ken Starr was appointed under that statute, and he strayed from his original mission.
Oh, so you say the problem was Ken Starr, not the statute? I mean,
well, it's
not to be nerdy about the late 90s.
The problem wasn't the statute, I believe, worked. It's that the three-judge panel, mostly conservative judges on the D.C. Circuit, I believe they were, who were former colleagues of Ken Starr, had been a D.C. Circuit Court judge. They allowed him to get into stuff that really wasn't related to the original appointment. And I know that President Clinton lied under oath. He lied about adultery, which is a sin, absolutely, but it's not, a criminal act he lied about. His lying under oath was arguably criminal perjury. He was never prosecuted for that. But bottom line is the vast majority of the American people believe that impeachment was way out of line and that Ken Starr had wasted a lot of money going into things he shouldn't. So then after all that was over, Congress just let the independent counsel statute expire. And that is, I think, unfortunate because that put us back where we were in 1973 when Archie Cox was fired. And I still remember when I was 12 years old and Archie Cox was fired. And, I would ask the grown-ups, why was he, what was he doing? He was investigating the president. Who fired him? The president. Even at 12 years old, I knew there's something wrong with that.
Even a 12-year-old can see that's a problem.
Do I get to fire my teacher if my teacher catches me doing bad stuff? No, it doesn't work that way, I was told. Well, so that's the whole point of the independent counsel statute. But let the counsel be independent, and then the judges supervise the counsel and so forth. They're in the Justice Department, but there are some questions about whether the independent counsel statute was constitutional, but Ken Starr certainly made a big mess of it, getting into the whole Monica Lewinsky business. And, so the Congress let it expire. So that puts us back where we were in 1973. And we've had to spend 20 months worrying about when is Bob Mueller going to get fired.
Yes, right.
By Donald Trump. And Trump is yelling at Jeff Sessions to get him to fire Mueller and so forth, or to rein in the investigation. And now we have a new attorney general who's appointed who has a conflict of interest because he literally, interviewed with Donald Trump to be a defense attorney. Yeah,
it seems to me that if Bob Mueller was truly apolitical through this process, which I thought he was, I assume. I mean, I only know what I heard in reports. That as soon as that report landed with Barr, when Barr wrote the letter, he just dipped it into political understanding, into political opinion instantly.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I think that's what happened. I mean, I think Bob Mueller is very much of a straight shooter, and he's demonstrated himself to be. He never would have taken this on and put up with this kind of grief from this White House and the demonization on Fox News and the rest of it, the attacks, if he had meant to try to skew this in any way. And we can go through the what the Barr letter says. We absolutely have to see the Mueller report.
Sure.
And what we may very well find is, first, collusion with the Russians, but collusion not amounting to criminal conspiracy that could be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's a critically important distinction. We already know there was collusion with the Russians. That's what
how come collusion's not against the law? I mean, I know that criminal conspiracy is. It's under some statutes that have nothing to do with it. Why isn't there a law that says that politicians cannot collude with other governments? Like, why don't we hold that to a different standard than criminal conspiracy, which is, complicated for
the question is, what's colluding with other governments? I
Sure.
mean, you would say the president of the United States is running for re-election, can't meet with foreign ambassadors. He'd pretty much be out of business as a president, ineffective. So, people are going to be meeting with foreign nationals, are going to have meetings with ambassadors. It's not helpful when Jeff Sessions just happens to forget when he met with a Russian ambassador.
All that should be illegal and not just untoward. Is there a reason it's not illegal?
Well, ambassadors are here for a reason. I mean, we expect our ambassador to be able to talk with people in the Russian government, and their ambassador will talk to people in our government. So, that's not the problem. The problem is that one, you can have some collusion that is actual criminal conspiracy.
Yes.
And apparently that didn't transpire. For example, if the Trump people had said, you go hack the emails and then this is that. Apparently the Trump people were smart enough to let what happens happen and just know about it. Having a heads up that someone's committing criminal acts is not collusion. That may be addressed in the actual Mueller report. The fact someone's about to commit a crime and don't report it, or know that they already committed a crime, already hacked Hillary Clinton's email, and that they're going to give it to WikiLeaks. So long as you're not helping them give it to WikiLeaks.
If you know and you don't stop it, the sort of the version of the Good Samaritan law
in
the rest of our society. That's the stuff that I feel like is in that report. Is that what you think is in there?
They weren't Good Samaritans. They knew it, and they not only didn't stop it, they knew when it would happen, but they didn't coordinate within the meaning of the definition.
I truly believe, we're going to jump to a commercial, but I truly believe they were too incompetent to even coordinate. Had they been more capable, I bet they totally would have, because it even says in the Barr report, the definition that Robert Mueller used for criminal conspiracy, and it was really specific. Like, you have to have an agreement ahead of time on specific actions, and that's just not how anyone would collude, for the love of it all. Like, that is not.
That's why conspiracy is extremely difficult to prosecute criminally.
And what kind of person is going to get caught of conspiracy? Yeah. Like, you'd even have to be more inept than what I feel the Trump.
But there's a lot of collusion we need to know about that it may not be criminally charged.
All right. Well, that's Richard Painter. We're going to hear about how he feels about being in Sarah Sanders' brackets of those who are opposed to Trump. Did you know about this? That Sarah Sanders?
I knew all about it, and I tweeted back at her and as to why her daddy didn't teach her not to lie.
Yeah. This is AM 950, Progressive Voice of Minnesota, and the repartee with Doug Padgett and Richard Painter in today. Hey, welcome back, all. Doug Padgett in with Richard Painter. Just had to step out. Just got to grab a phone call. Got a lot going on, that guy. I like it a lot. Richard, as you might know, is a professor of law at the University of Minnesota, right here in the great state where AM 950 comes out of. And he's also he was an ethics attorney with the Bush administration. He's going to think about ethical issues. So his comments on all this, his comments about what ethics mean in its relationship to the Trump campaign, seems pretty important on a day like today. So when he gets back, this is what matters. What's collusion, and how does it affect the political and the legal situation? And then what is collusion? And he's going to talk a bit about that, because people like me believe that it was obvious that the Trump campaign was colluding with Russia by the definition that a lot of us would use for the word collusion. Now, for others, what they mean by the word collusion, and I know this because I have a number of friends who hold this opinion, when they say collusion, or when they read in the report from William Barr, no conspiracy, they just use conspiracy and collusion as synonyms. They're interchangeable. It's pretty much the same perspective. If you're going to collude, it means that you conspired. And most people in politics, in the regular citizenry, are not sitting around thinking about the difference between colluding and conspiring. But we actually do this all the time. right? If you think about your business, if you work in one, or you think about your neighborhood, if you live in one, or you think about your friends, there are some times where the deal you make with another group or organization is really specific to accomplishing a certain goal, and you come to a formal or a shared understanding of an actual agreement. Here's an illustration. Tonight, it's going to be nearly 70 degrees in the Great Twin Cities, and I'm going to host a backyard party. So I'm having a bunch of people come over for our backyard party. Now, if I was co-hosting with someone, that would be something akin to a conspiracy, right? We're going to plan together. We're going to decide together. We might even menu plan. We would decide who's going to take on which roles, who's going to do what. There's no co-host for this little party we're doing in the backyard. A bunch of people are coming. Friends are having a great time. They're doing all their things. They're going to show up. They're going to bring some things. We're just colluding on having a backyard party. We're not in an agreement. And when you read in the Barr letter sent to Congress that what Robert Mueller used as a definition of collusion was the tacit or implicit agreement towards specific actions and outcomes. In other words, hosting the party together. But if you just show up and you're in my backyard tonight, which if you're nearby, you should swing on over, and you bring a dessert or you bring a bottle of wine, and we're going to share a little bit of yours and you're going to share a little bit of ours, but don't really know if you're coming, not sure. We're just sort of colluding on having a great night. This is the difference. What I believe we've seen from the Trump administration, an investigation that was launched in the first place, is because the FBI and the Justice Department was watching the behavior of the Trump administration, and they were saying, this is unbelievable. They're having a party together. I mean, when Trump fires the director of the FBI and says it has something to do with the Russia thing, and then that afternoon or that evening, he meets in the Oval Office with the ambassador from Russia and says, hey, I took care of the Comey deal. That is essentially having the party together. So Richard's back with us. Richard, I was just giving an illustration that I'm having a backyard party today because it's going to be almost 70 degrees in Minnesota. You know, that's what we do, right? We just act as if, all things are right. And I was saying the difference in my mind, you can tell me if this is right or not, between colluding and conspiracy is that if I had invited you to come to the party and we were going to co-host, and we pick the menu together and we decide on the time and the date, that's a conspiracy. But if I just invite you over and say, Richard, bring whatever you got, show up when you can, stay as late as you want, and you just kind of come and hang out and you're at the party, that's like collusion. We didn't plan together, but we partied together.
Well, yes, that's a very good, very, very helpful analogy. And of course, the party has to be, for there to be criminal conspiracy, there has to be an illegal party.
Well, there will be tonight. Yeah, I mean, we're not kidding around here.
Well, yeah. I don't know. The governor wants to legalize it, but anyway, the Republicans are.
It's not a Hunter Haas party. If you all know what I'm talking about.
But anyway, I think that the key is to have a criminal conspiracy. First, you need to have an illegal act. So you have to identify what the Russians did was illegal. Now, we know what they did. They hacked the email. That was illegal. And then distributed stolen emails to WikiLeaks. The other thing the Russians did that was illegal was some of their interactions with Facebook. They used deception and mail fraud and wire fraud in connection with the social media.
Okay, so hang on. This is getting really important. You're like, for Russia to just spend money on Facebook trying to influence the election, that's not illegal.
That's not illegal. I mean, for them, for example, I've put out tweets about, I think that Israel ought to choose a new prime minister. I'm not a big Bibi fan. So I put out tweets on that. Now, am I trying to influence an Israeli election? No. I hope I'm not in violation of Israeli law and that Bibi won't have me arrested if I ever fly to Tel Aviv. No, I don't think it's going to happen. We weigh in. We express our opinions, even though we're not citizens of a country. Other people express opinions about the United States, and that's not illegal. What is illegal, what the Russians did, is they deceived Facebook. They had people posing as people they weren't to open up Facebook pages. And when you lie to Facebook to do that, and you're using deception to get access to someone else's social media platform. Then we're getting into mail fraud, wire fraud, and a bunch of
So that's what the Trump
charges.
campaign would have had to know about and participate in agreement in, is the specific actions that were determined to be illegal that were in the indictments about the Russians.
Exactly right. You need to have the illegal conduct of the Russians, which is on the one hand computer hacking and distributing stolen emails on WikiLeaks. The other set of illegal conduct, criminal conduct by the Russians, had to do with the mail fraud, wire fraud in connection with the social media. The Trump campaign, if they know about it, that's not enough to have a conspiracy. Knowing about it and knowing when it's going to occur, that's not enough. Getting a heads up about someone else's crime doesn't make you a co-conspirator. To be criminally liable for conspiracy, you need to participate in the planning of acts and assisting in the specific acts. Now, with the emails, if they come to you and say, we have Hillary Clinton's emails, will you help us distribute those to WikiLeaks? There you could have a problem. I still want to know in the Roger Stone trial why he was talking to WikiLeaks and what was going on. But at this juncture, it does not appear, according to William Barr, that they have criminal conspiracy, enough evidence to prove criminal conspiracy beyond a reasonable doubt. But it's, once again, you would not have criminal conspiracy. It would be extremely troublesome, and American people will know about it if the Trump campaign is getting a heads up on stolen emails, when stolen emails are going to be given to WikiLeaks, and they have a heads up on that from the Russians.
Okay, so we're going to go to a break, and when we come back, I want to ask you about that, why it took 20 months for the Mueller investigation. Why do you think it took 20 months for them to conclude that it hadn't gone so far as organized conspiracy in the acts that the Russian government participated in that we knew were illegal? Why did it... So, can you hold that, and we'll come back here after the break. AM 950, the Progressive Voice of Minnesota, Doug Padgett, Richard Painter on the repartee today.
This is Gary from...
And today we're joined also by Richard Painter. Richard, thank you for being here. I was asking you just before the break, why did it take so long for the Mueller team to come to the conclusion that conspiracy or the Trump administration or campaign did not participate with the Russians in the actions the Russians did that were determined to be illegal? Why did that take so long, and why all these indictments and all this flipping of, Paul Manafort and Gates and Mike Flynn? It seems like if you're going to have people flipping and working with the government to help lay out what's going on, they must have thought there was conspiracy, right? They didn't just think it was collusion. They must have assumed that there was coordination on the acts that were illegal.
Yes. There's a lot of contacts between Russians and people in the Trump campaign, and we know about it. We know about the Trump Tower meeting in which Jared Kushner and Donald Trump Jr. were there, promised dirt on Hillary. We know that there was a Russian agent there. We know that the Russians wanted the lifting of the sanctions. We know that the Russians were showing up at the Republican National Convention in 2016. We know that even the coffee boy, he had a Russian handler who called himself the professor over in the UK. The list of Russian contacts goes on, people lying about Russian contacts. And that's why we need to see the full Mueller report. It is very clear there was collusion. I mean, that's what the Trump Tower meeting was, but it just wasn't necessarily criminal collusion. And it appears to me that the Trump people knew that the Russians had the email. President Trump, by the way, publicly said that he wanted the Russians to hack Hillary's email
during the campaign.
Exactly.
He said that.
So they knew about it. I think we read the Mueller report, we're going to find out that everybody in the Trump team knew the Russians had the email and they were going to give it to WikiLeaks. Roger Stone was making contacts with WikiLeaks, but the problem is apparently it wasn't enough evidence to show that they, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Trump people were actually conspiring with the Russians to give it to WikiLeaks, as opposed to the Russians know how to get some to WikiLeaks if they want to. They've got Snowden right there in Russia. I mean, they know this game, they didn't need to conspire, and I think the Trump people knew not to conspire with them and help them do it because the Russians know how to hack email and know how to give it to WikiLeaks.
And this is why I think Donald Trump has been saying for 2 years, no collusion, because he assumed they were going to find there was collusion. And knowing that they may not find conspiracy then validates his claim that there's no collusion. Or do you think Donald Trump just literally doesn't know the difference between collusion or sharing the party together and conspiring, which is planning and executing the party together?
Yes,
do you think he doesn't understand it, or do you think he's been masterfully working this setup for 2.5 or 3 years?
He wants to deny there was any collusion at all. He wants to deny he was ever at the party.
He wants to deny the party even happened, doesn't he? He wants to say Russia didn't even interfere with the election.
Yeah, I mean, it's like with the party analogy. If you showed up at a pot party, and I showed up at a pot party. I didn't coordinate with anyone buying the grass, and I didn't do this. I didn't inhale. Yeah. Obviously, this is a lot more serious than a pot party. This is an election party with the Russians meddling in an American election. They've been trying to meddle in Western democracies' elections for 100 years. And they clearly knew about it. They had a heads up as to when it was likely to happen. They took advantage of all that. That's obviously collusion when you get a heads up as when someone's going to commit a crime. But you don't commit conspiracy unless you help them plan the crime and give them assistance.
Do you think Congress ought to pass a law that specifies that collusion itself from a campaign is an illegal action, so that this kind of thing doesn't have to happen again, where it's put under some kind of wire fraud and money fraud and criminal conspiracy language that doesn't have anything to do with elections or politics. Yeah. It specifically has to do with like business enterprises and criminal business enterprises. And politics are so different. It feels to me like this should be like in federal federal election law statutes.
Yeah, the way I deal with it is through a mandatory disclosure requirement we should have that we don't have, just like we should require candidates to disclose their tax returns and a bunch of things. We should have a requirement that campaigns disclose on a form any and all contacts with foreign nationals, certainly foreign nationals at a certain level. My senior people in the campaign, we have to figure out what kind of disclosure is required there.
Sure.
But you shouldn't have a situation where Jeff Sessions works for the Trump campaigns, meeting with a Russian ambassador, and then happens to forget about it when he's asked a question by Senator Al Franken in his confirmation hearing.
Yeah, he didn't.
Those contacts.
If he forgot about it, he probably isn't qualified to be the Attorney General. If that's a thing you'd forget, right?
Well, exactly. And so I think going forward that a campaign contribution needs to be reported very quickly and becomes public quite quickly in these campaigns.
Do you think the NRA funneled money from the Russians into the Trump campaign? Do you think Mueller's looking at that? That was his big line of inquiry for a while, that Russian money was being flown in on airplanes, put into American bank accounts, and then put into these different organizations, including the NRA. And then that's how they were literally funding some of the Trump social outreach stuff. Do you think any of that's true, or do you think that's just me sitting in my basement?
I'm sure the Russians had a lot of money in the NRA. This is the problem you get into with that, is our campaign finance laws are so completely messed up. Yeah. They keeping money, including foreign money, out of a campaign is literally impossible. I wrote a book on campaign finance reform in 2015, the 14 to 15. I was on leave at Harvard University. I still remember getting up and giving a summary of my book at the Harvard Faculty Club and saying, well, it's absolutely illegal for foreign nationals to contribute anything to an American political campaign. It's illegal, absolutely illegal. It's illegal to drink under the age of 21 too. Now let's go walk across the Harvard yard there where all those freshmen live. Go to the University of Minnesota and, I shouldn't say that. I'm a professor at the University of Minnesota, but our students are all teetotalers. But right. The problem is,
but not at UW Wisconsin.
I'm sure. Well, over there, Badger country. But this is the problem: is it's as if you could say you can have a party, the seniors can have a big beer party and not invite the freshmen. What's going on in Washington? The huge money party, and then you say that the foreign nationals can't show up at the political money party that has been sanctioned by the United States Supreme Court and Citizens United. It's not going to work. You can't keep the Russians out. We're going to use the NRA. We have all sorts of people using these religious right groups who couldn't give a rat's behind about abortion, but they want to get somebody elected or torpedo somebody else. And we need more disclosure. We need to know where these groups are getting their money. And I bet there's a lot of Russian money in organizations, not just the NRA. And our campaign finance system is a large part of our problem. But Bob Mueller can't take that on.
Do you think his report will talk about that? Do you think it's possible that he will have sections where he says, here's what we found out about money and it's a problem and this is how we saw it functioning? Like, this is as close as it feels like we're going to get to some kind of a committee that looks in and digs deep to find out how all this is working. I'm just assuming in these 2,000 interviews he did, or what, however, what are these? All these numbers are 1 million papers worth of.
There is a lot there. The Russians were conducting this operation on multiple fronts, engaging in lots of criminal activity with 26 Russians indicted. So apparently Vladimir Putin is saying he's vindicated. Well, he can put those 26 Russians on a plane to JFK and we'll pick them up and actually prosecute them. But they're indicted. There's serious criminal activity. They took advantage of holes in our campaign finance system. There's going to be a lot in the Mueller report, and that's why nobody wants us to see it.
Okay, so one of the things that's in the Barr's letter about the Mueller report is that Mueller says, and we'll get to this in the next segment, but he says, this report does not find that the Trump campaign participated in obstruction of justice, but it also does not exonerate them. Some kind of weird...
Yeah, well, actually, I think that it mentioned the president.
The president.
Okay,
president.
This is going to be critically important. Because
and not someone in the campaign.
Yeah,
okay.
The obstruction of justice is by the president. And I will explain, we can discuss it after the break, why it appears quite clear that the president obstructed justice. And the reason that it is a debatable question is a matter of constitutional law about whether it is possible for any president ever to obstruct justice under our Constitution the way it is designed. I believe the answer to that is yes, but there are those who say no.
So do you think there could be knowing that sentence is in Barr's letter tells us that it's in Mueller's report, do you think there could be or should be a sentence that says something in the Mueller report like, while we did not find criminal conspiracy, we do believe that the Trump campaign colluded or participated with Russians or Russian individuals in these ways? Because it feels funny to me that Mueller is saying, it doesn't say this, but it also doesn't say this on obstruction of justice. Why doesn't he do that? Or do you think he did do that when it comes to not conspiracy, but certainly participation with them at a level? The way that I guess Comey said, we're not going to prosecute Hillary, but what she did was really stupid. That's kind of that version of it.
Well, I think we're going beyond that. I want to make sure we treat these two issues separately. And it's good to have two separate segments on this show about them. One is the collusion conspiracy issue.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of collusion, a lot of heads up they had about what the Russians were going to do, but apparently did not amount to criminal conspiracy. The second issue, which I would like to discuss after the break, which is an entirely separate issue of the report, is whether the President of the United States himself, Donald Trump, committed criminal obstruction of justice. That is the question where Robert Mueller did not reach a conclusion, one way or the other. And I would like to explain why I believe he did not reach such a conclusion, and that almost certainly turns not on the facts, but on a constitutional question of whether any president ever could commit the act, whether it's possible for a president to commit obstruction of federal justice in a Justice Department investigation. There are constitutional law scholars who believe that is impossible. I do not agree, and we can have that discussion, but it is entirely separate from the whole collusion thing. It is about obstruction of justice by the president. It's the same thing that drove Richard Nixon from office, but unfortunately, because of the Ford pardon, we were able to have case law on this fundamentally critical question of, can a president ever be charged with obstruction of justice in a criminal investigation?
As Nixon put it, if the president does it, that makes it right. That's the argument, right?
There are those who still argue
who still
that.
hold to that. Yeah, all the Nixonites are still around, aren't they? From Roger Stone right to William Barr. All right, we'll come back here after the break. AM 950, the Progressive Voice of Minnesota, in your afternoon repartee. And welcome back. I appreciate that Representative Dean knows how to say the repartee. Not everybody knows that word of lively banter. We'll have a little lively banter here with Richard Painter. And, okay, Richard, so we talked a little bit about collusion, talked about the difference between that and conspiracy, but now there's this obstruction of justice. Let me pose this question to you, and then you run with it. If Robert Mueller believed, or if the sitting Attorney General at the time, Jeff Sessions, and then the Assistant Attorney General, Rob Rosenstein, if they believed that a president cannot commit obstruction of justice, which, by the way, is different than a president can't be charged with a crime, that's different than when a president does something that cannot be determined or thought of as obstructing justice because the president gets to do that. That's the argument that William Barr holds. Why did they ever pursue the possibility of obstruction of justice if it was assumed that the president could not commit obstruction of justice? Do you see my question? Was it that Jeff Sessions thought a president could obstruct justice, and now William Barr says a president can't? So we've changed the interpretation of law with the change of attorney generals? Or why was Robert Mueller ever sent on this task to find out if Donald Trump obstructed justice if the belief in the Justice Department is a president can't obstruct justice?
Well, I think if Robert Mueller himself was firmly of the belief the president could not obstruct justice, he never would have pursued this. And he did. And Jeff Sessions was recused, and Rod Rosenstein allowed him to pursue this. Now, let me address the question of.
So you're saying Rob Rosenstein must have assumed that a president could?
Well, we don't know, it's an open question. Let me just discuss the issue.
Yeah.
The issue is. Can the President of the United States obstruct justice in a federal investigation? One theory is that the President of the United States is in charge of the Justice Department, and he can hire and fire the Attorney General for any reason at any time, and he can tell the Attorney General to drop a case or an investigation, just as Richard Nixon is on tape telling his acting Attorney General, Dick Kleindienst, drop the case against ITT. He said the F word before case. And that's because ITT was a major Republican contributor.
And it wasn't federal case.
Exactly.
That wasn't the F word that he used. It wasn't drop the federal case.
No, it was
Okay.
not. It was a four-letter F word. Okay. And so the bottom line is that one theory is that the President of the United States has the power to do that, and he can turn the investigation off like flipping off a light switch. This is a view of the presidency that has some roots maybe in common law, but it's a common law understanding of the role of the king. The king is the law, so goes the theory. The king cannot violate the law because the king has been put here on earth by God to give us the laws, and the king can't violate his own law no more than God or Jesus could sin against God. I mean, that's the theory of the monarchy, that it had this divine blessing and so forth. And, we had the American Revolution there back in the 1770s, and we were perfectly fine with God's law and all of that. But as for that king, we decided we didn't want a king. So the question is whether when we constructed the Constitution and gave this power to the president to appoint an attorney general who would be in charge of, among other things, prosecutions, and the president could fire the attorney general, whether this is a power that is so extensive that it really amounts to having a king for 4 years. I think the answer to that is unequivocally no. But there are those who adhere to what we call unitary executive theory, particularly on the conservative end of the political spectrum. Some people have this view that, well, yes, the president could fire the attorney general because it actually is the president's investigation. Mm-hmm. It's Donald Trump's investigation, and he's ultimately in charge of Donald Trump's investigation of Donald Trump. Okay, that's one theory. I think it's wrong, but it's never been tested. Why hasn't it been tested? Because Richard Nixon obstructed justice, clearly obstructed justice. Congress was going to impeach him for it, but he resigned, and he got a pardon from Gerald Ford. Now, if he had not received that pardon, he would have been tried for obstructing justice, and we would have some case law on this. So I think we're discovering now yet another part of the cost of the Ford pardon of Richard Nixon, that this was never clarified whether a president could obstruct justice.
why did the Constitution framers leave this, if it's clear that they wanted to move from the power of a king to the power of an elected official that was in 3 equal branches of government, why is the structure of the Constitution such that it leaves this question open where someone like William Barr or anybody else who holds a unitary executive theory, which Bush also operated under, because I saw the movie Vice, so I heard about this, that Scalia and others are part of that whole tribe of people who think of that. Why did the constitutional framers leave this question open where people like William Barr and Scalia and others could have interpreted it that saying that the president cannot obstruct justice because, as Nixon said, if the president does it, that makes it legal?
Well, I don't know if the founders ever anticipated someone like Donald Trump, but they did anticipate that a bad actor could get into the presidency, and that's exactly why they had the impeachment clause of the Constitution. Mm-hmm. And it's wide open. It's high crimes and misdemeanors. And with respect to President Andrew Johnson, after the Civil War, high crimes and misdemeanors merely meant sympathizing too much with the South and a number of other things. We all know that Richard Nixon was almost impeached over high crimes and misdemeanors for obstructing justice. I mean, he was forced from office. So the Constitution worked because Congress picked this up. And this argument, the president can't obstruct justice because he's the president, doesn't fly very well with American people. It isn't going to fly in the House Judiciary Committee. And you didn't hear it back in 1973. When it was clear that he obstructed justice, he was out of there. So now the key is, this is why we need the Mueller report. It needs to go to the United States House of Representatives Judiciary Committee, where they will decide whether the president obstructed justice. And if they want to go back to their districts and say, no, he can't because we elected a king for 4 years, well, they can explain that to the people in their districts. I doubt they're going to go that way, but they need to get the Mueller report and see what President Trump did, because I believe that report describes conduct that, if were committed by the Attorney General of the United States, would be slam dunk obstruction of justice. Mm-hmm. And the Mueller would have prosecuted him. The only open question, and the one that Robert Mueller was not going to opine on, and I don't think he should have, was, because it's the president, is it different? And
in our system, would it be only the Supreme Court that could determine this, or could Congress write legislation that would satisfy this question for future?
Yes.
The next time Donald Trump obstructs justice, like next week,
you don't need legislation because we don't need to prosecute him for this right now. We could deal with that later. We need to impeach and remove.
Yeah.
And the founders got that right. You can at least get rid of him. And then if he were tried for obstruction of justice, and the Supreme Court actually agreed with this unitary executive theory that you got a king for 4 years, we would think about whether we amend the Constitution, whatever we do. But the point is, the founders addressed the major issue, which is, if a president is obstructing justice, you can get him out of there. But that's the job of the House of Representatives and the Senate.
Well, that's Richard Painter. I'm Doug Padgett. This is AM 950, the Progressive Voice of Minnesota. It's been our afternoon repartee. Thanks, Richard. Great talking with you.
Thank you.